Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Climate Change and Brownfields 101, hosted by NJIT Technical Assistance to Brownfield Communities, or NJIT TAB. We're excited to have you all here, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to spend it with us, expanding your climate change and brownfield knowledge. My name is Fatima Matos, and I'm the events coordinator here at NJIT Center for Community Systems. Mimi Marcus, our manager for marketing and engagement, and I will be helping to facilitate today's webinar. Before we get started, however, I first want to go over some ground rules. 1. This session will be recorded. All recordings and presentations shown today will be available on our website at www.njit.edu/tab. 2. While you are muted, you can utilize the chat feature for comments and to check in with other participants. Please let us know where you're joining from now. Just want to, get you a little bit warmed up for the chat. The Q&A module is reserved for questions to our speaker and moderator. You can vote on questions posed by others to boost them in the queue. Following the presentation, there will be approximately 10 minutes dedicated to any questions or comments which have not yet been addressed during the talk. And at that time, those who have asked questions via the Q&A module will receive messages in the chat to verify if you would like to ask your question directly, or Carrie and William may just verbally call upon you. At that time, Mimi and I will be fervently searching for your name to allow you to unmute yourself to ask your question. So feel free. Don't worry, you won't put us in an imposition. To review, type questions in the Q&A window and comments in the chat window. If there's a question that can't be answered today, feel free to visit our LinkedIn event page for today's webinar, where we can connect and answer those questions for you. Feel free to also engage further in discussion there as well. I'm sure there are attendees here today that have a vast wealth of knowledge on different areas of brownfield redevelopment and climate change. Continue the conversation and learning after today's webinar. Or, if you run into any technical issues during today's webinar, or if you know of any attendees that are having any trouble accessing it, feel free to email me at fm392@njit.edu. Mimi, if you could put that in the chat so that people have access to that as well. I'll be monitoring my email and will provide technical assistance as needed. 5. Lastly, at the end of this webinar, you'll be directed to a feedback survey. Our goal is to serve brownfield communities to the best of our ability. We would love to hear your thoughts so that we can provide resources and materials that align with your goals and needs. If you have an idea for a future webinar regarding a topic you're interested in, feel free to provide that feedback as well. We want to create content that works for you. Now, with those rules out of the way, we can begin. It is my pleasure to introduce a woman whose knowledge of climate sustainability and resilience can only be matched by her knowledge of wild birds. Ms. Carrie Martin, Environmental Sustainability Planner for NJIT Center for Community Systems. Driven by her experiences following Superstorm Sandy and the hardships faced by her family and loved ones, Ms. Martin strives to create safe, vibrant, and resilient communities as an environmental planning professional and climate subject matter expert at NJIT TAB. She is here to share that understanding and knowledge with you today. And trust me, ask her bird questions. She really knows a lot. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Carrie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Fatima. So hello, everyone, and welcome again to Climate Change and Brownfields 101. Before we get started, I wanted to give you a little background on myself, even though Fatima gave you a little inside scoop. I'm Carrie Martin, the Environmental Sustainability Planner at NJIT TAB. I'll talk more about TAB later, but we provide free technical assistance to government entities and nonprofit organizations in EPA Regions 2 and 4. I personally provide technical knowledge at the intersections of brownfields, climate resilience, and sustainability, based on my previous experience in natural hazard mitigation and environmental policy. So before we get started, in earnest, I want to give you guys an opportunity to tell me a little bit about yourselves. So Mimi is going to pull up some polls in the chat. Yes, so on your screen, feel free to answer where are you joining us from? What type of entity do you work for? How often do you work on brownfields related issues in your work? And how often do you work on climate change, green infrastructure, renewable energy, and energy efficiency? I'll just give you all a couple of minutes to answer those questions before we get started. All right, I'm seeing a lot of folks from New Jersey and New York. Thank you. Some North Carolina. Excited to see you all here. Okay, we got some consultants, some municipal people, people joining us from state agencies and nonprofits. Happy to see people who are very involved with brownfields. Thank you for coming. And happy to see people who are really involved in climate change. Happy to see you here too. And some people who are rarely involved in climate change. I'm also really glad you're here. I hope we can uh, integrate climate change into more of what you do on the daily basis. All right, Mimi, I think we're probably good to end in just a couple of minutes, or a couple of seconds, rather. Awesome. Well, thank you. Um, in today's webinar, we'll tackle how climate change impacts brownfield communities in general and brownfield sites specifically. We'll give you some tools to help your community build resilience. Then, we'll cover how you can redevelop your brownfield sites to better protect your communities from climate threats and how your site can reduce greenhouse gas emissions to better integrate renewable energy and energy efficiency. We'll hear from William Kurzenberger about how the city of Perth Amboy has built resilience into their brownfield redevelopment. And then at the end, of course, we'll wrap up with some questions. Know that we're going to cover a lot today. The webinar will be an overview of how climate change impacts brownfields and how brownfield reuse and redevelopment can make your community more resilient. There will be time at the end for you to give feedback on what you've heard about today, and that will help us inform what kind of webinars we want to build out in the future. So let's get to it. But first, a pop quiz. Feel free to answer on your screen just as before with the poll feature. This question is, how are climate change and extreme weather events related? Climate change increases how often, how intense, and how long extreme heat events are. Climate change increases how often and how severe rainfall events are. Climate change increases how often and how severe drought events are. Or all of the above. Getting some good participation here. Don't be shy. You won't get graded at the end. All right, I think we're probably good to end. So the answer, as you might imagine, is all of the above. According to the Fifth National Climate Assessment, climate change describes changes in average weather conditions that persist over multiple decades or longer. Global climate patterns are changing and rapidly. These global changes include rapid warming, sea level rise, and rainfall changing rainfall patterns. Across the US, annual temperature is going up. As you can see from this graphic from the Fifth National Climate Assessment, the east coast of the US is experiencing an increase in annual precipitation, sea level, warm nights, and heavy precipitation events. Extreme heat events, drought, wildfire, and hurricanes are becoming more frequent and/or more severe. These extreme events come with costly damage, and each additional increment of warming leads to greater risks to our infrastructure, health, and economy. You might be asking, what does this have to do with brownfields? As you may already know, EPA defines brownfields as a property whose expansion, redevelopment, or reuse may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of contamination. While some brownfield sites are easy to identify, others might be trickier. Some brownfields are vacant tracts of land, but based on their previous use, we might have the reason to believe that chemicals were spilled or dumped there. Brownfields can be a variety of sizes, too. Smaller sites, including closed gas stations and local dry cleaners. Larger sites could be massive factories and steel mills. No matter what the scale, brownfields were abandoned when industry moved elsewhere, leaving behind residents without jobs and exposure to pollution. Community exposure to contamination is a common concern with brownfield sites. and this is further complicated by increasing and intensifying extreme weather events due to climate change. Unaddressed brownfield sites are susceptible to increased and repeated damage by extreme events. Structure and infrastructure damage can threaten the environmental and public health of surrounding communities by potentially mobilizing or exposing contamination. For example, along the coast, sea level rise and coastal storms can spread contamination from and compromise structures on brownfield sites. Residents could be exposed to hazardous substances if flooding is severe enough to release underground storage tanks, which is seen on the left here, and compromise above ground storage tanks. In 2017 on the right, we can see Hurricane Harvey, which inundated multiple brownfield sites in Houston, Texas, and potentially exposed residents to toxic pollution. Climate impacts should be considered during every stage of the brownfield redevelopment process, from site investigation to final reuse. Without adequate resilience measures, climate impacts can minimize how protective cleanup and redevelopment are. For example, drought conditions can crack clay caps and weaken vegetated cover used for capping on brownfield sites. Capping creates and adds a barrier between the surface and contaminants. Drought conditions can also impair sustainable cleanup strategies that use biological degradation processes to break down contaminants, such as bioremediation and phytoremediation. Delays in addressing climate impacts can also make site ownership and redevelopment more expensive to finance, insure, maintain, and sell. If your site is in a hazard-prone area and flooding or other climate threats damage the site partners are at risk of losing their investments and having to abandon the projects. So what do we do? Climate resilience describes the ability to anticipate and prepare for climate threats, respond to natural hazard events when they happen, and then recover quickly and with minimal social, economic, and environmental damage. Folks often describe resilience in terms of not only bouncing back from natural disasters, but also bouncing back better. You build resilience not necessarily by rebuilding back exactly how it was before the damage by the disaster. You build resilience by taking a step back, assessing the situation, and coming up with ways to rebuild so that during the next storm, the damage is reduced or there isn't any damage at all. For example, if a building on the coast has flooded every major hurricane, it doesn't really make sense to rebuild the building exactly as it was before the last storm. You might want to see if you can install a stormwater pump station nearby, build a flood control system, elevate the building, or move it to a safer location. Different levels of government, nonprofits and community groups, and other brownfield site owners and developers can help their community build resilience. For example, a local government can engage with their current residents, especially their most vulnerable residents, and in community spaces like schools or libraries, to discuss how they experience local climate change impacts like flooding or extreme heat. Local leaders and residents can have a dialogue on how they reuse a brownfield site to potentially create a project that would address their challenges and help the community before, during, and after extreme events. EPA notes that communities with brownfield sites are statistically more likely to be minority, low income, more linguistically isolated, and less likely to have a high school education than the U.S. population overall. The EPA also notes that climate change disproportionately impacts vulnerable populations. Low-income communities, communities of color, and tribal communities are more likely to live in or near high-hazard areas and may not have the resources to cope with these events. For smaller and rural communities, building resilience to climate change is particularly important because these communities can be isolated and not readily able to access supplies and resources during emergencies. Further, small and rural communities may not have the capacity to tackle climate challenges on their own. By redeveloping brownfields with climate change in mind, communities can improve the lives of those most affected by it. My hope for the rest of this presentation is to equip you with some tools that can help you build resilience in these communities. To begin, it's important to understand how climate change can impact brownfield sites specifically. There are several simple, free federal resources you can use to screen what extreme events your brownfield sites may be vulnerable to. The FEMA Flood Map Service Center can help you determine if your site is in a FEMA-defined flood zone. You can use the interactive map to find your brownfield sites and download an image of the site for your records. Here, we have a point on NJIT in Newark, New Jersey. You can see that the university is not in a FEMA-defined flood zone. But if our site was in the town of Harrison nearby, in the area colored by the blue towards the right of the image, then you would be in a FEMA flood zone. To download this image, you would simply click on the dynamic map in the top left of the image. It is important to note, though, that this is just a place to start. Just because your site is not in a FEMA flood zone does not mean it has no flood risk. Flooding can happen anywhere it rains. And as climate change increases the amount and frequency of rainfall events, it's important to understand future risk. I'm going to take a brief moment. I see we have a Q&A and a chat, and I just want to make sure that everybody is on the same page. Okay, I will address all comments at the very end. But thank you, and please keep using the Q&A. All right, so several agencies came together to create the climate mapping for resilience and adaptation. Using this assessment tool, you can search the address of your brownfield property to receive climate projections for your area for coastal inundation, drought, extreme heat, flooding, and wildfire. Projections are available at the county, tribal area, and census tract level. At the county level, you can download a complete report of climate projections for each hazard. On this slide, we have climate projections for Essex County, New Jersey, where NJIT is located. The first column are different indicators of extreme heat. For example, the first row shows annual days with maximum temperature above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. In the late 20th century to 2005, Essex County experienced about 12 days a year where temperatures were above 90 degrees. Today and through 2044, Essex County is expected to get anywhere from 29 to 31 days that are over 90 degrees. By the end of the 21st century, this could jump up between 46 and 75 days a year that are over 90 degrees. If you have a brownfield site in Essex County, you would use the fact that there's going to be about 2 to 2.5 months out of the year that are going to be very hot and use that to inform your reuse plan. If your site is near the coast, you can use NOAA's sea level rise viewer to determine what levels of sea level rise and high tide flooding might impact your property. You can use the interactive map to find your sites and raise the slider at the bottom to display how inundation might look at different sea levels and high tides. The EPA has also developed a 4-step exposure screening process to assess sea level rise on your brownfield site. The 4 steps are listed here: exploring sea level rise projections for planning and design scenarios, visualizing potential flooding at brownfield sites in the surrounding area, determine impacts of potential high tides and storms at the brownfield site, and incorporate findings to inform decisions on cleanup and redevelopment processing. To use this screening process, you can refer to EPA's fact sheet, which we will drop in the chat. And again, this presentation will be recorded and the slides will be available for you after if you want links to all of the things that we're talking about today. All right, so once you understand the potential climate risks on your site, you can develop actions to better protect your community from these risks. Known as climate adaptation actions, these strategies adjust natural or human systems so they can function in a new or changing environment. Okay, another pop quiz. Feel free to answer on your screen. We'll have the poll up. Great. So, how can green infrastructure help a community adapt to climate change? Green infrastructure stores, infiltrates, and evaporates stormwater. Green infrastructure can be used to recharge aquifers to reduce drought impacts. Green infrastructure can reduce the negative impacts from heat waves. And all of the above. All right, I think people are picking up on the little trick that I put into these pop quizzes. Yes, so As you might imagine, the answer is all of the above. One way to adjust natural systems to a changing climate is through green infrastructure. As I mentioned before, climate change is climate change is causing rainfall to increase across the country. Green infrastructure uses landscape features to store, infiltrate, and evaporate stormwater to reduce the burden of storm events on local water infrastructure. But green infrastructure has benefits beyond stormwater management. In terms of climate adaptation, green infrastructure can also be used to recharge aquifers to reduce drought impacts. In urban and suburban environments, where large areas are covered in concrete and blacktop, this absorbs a lot of heat. Adding trees and other vegetation can reduce the negative impacts of heat waves. There might be some hesitation to implement green infrastructure on brownfield sites. Note that the regulatory entity for your state will decide whether green infrastructure is appropriate for your site. This depends on the level of contamination or cleanup that has already been performed or is needed in the future. To help you decide if green infrastructure might work for your brownfield site, you can refer to NJIT TAB's website for our Green Stormwater Infrastructure Decision Tree. This planning tool was developed to help organizations seeking to implement green infrastructure on larger sites or several brownfield sites to assess and manage the site's unknowns. We also have a how-to video on the website. Green infrastructure can be implemented on a variety of scales, depending on the size and number of brownfield sites you are trying to redevelop. Watershed or landscape scale solutions encompass projects that preserve and restore natural landscape features, including forests, wetlands, and floodplains. They are suitable for large or multiple sites. By creating interconnected open space areas across a town, county, or region, watershed or landscape scale solutions can also provide recreational opportunities. For example, a stormwater park can be used for recreation during dry periods and store and treat stormwater during heavy precipitation events. On the left, you can see a Resilience Park in Hoboken, New Jersey. In another example, a greenway corridor along a river reduces extreme heat impacts, promotes clean air, and promotes walking and bicycling. On the bottom right is Proctor Creek Greenway in Atlanta. Both Hoboken's Resilience Park and Proctor Creek transformed their brownfields into beautiful recreational spaces that are also effective climate adaptation solutions. Floodplain and wetland restoration are also options for landscape or watershed scale green infrastructure. By restoring floodplains to their natural functions, floodplains can be used to filter water, reduce erosion, and store stormwater. Restoring or protecting wetlands filter, absorb, and slow runoff, and they also recharge groundwater. In Atlanta, Georgia, the City of Atlanta, Trust for Public Land, and Groundwork Atlanta are collaborating to revitalize the Chattahoochee riverfront within the city's boundaries. Currently, the waterfront contains industrial land and vacant, contaminated lots. Trust for Public Land recently completed the Chattahoochee Riverlands study. This study outlined a vision for a 100-mile multi-use greenway which connects 19 cities across 7 counties in Georgia. This greenway would include floodplain restoration for stormwater management and improve air and water quality, in addition to brownfields revitalization that will provide new recreational opportunities for the public. At the neighborhood or site scale, green infrastructure can be integrated on or around buildings, along streets, and on sidewalks and in parking lots. Green roofs are a great solution for dense urban areas or larger industrial office buildings. These roofs are created by building layers of drainage, engineered soil, and vegetation on a building's roof. They capture and store stormwater to reduce flood impacts and cool buildings during extreme heat events. Rain gardens are shallow depressions in the earth with vegetation that collect and absorb stormwater. Rain gardens can be created in a variety of unpaved spaces. Permeable pavement has openings in it to allow water to soak in the soil and is available in the form of asphalt, concrete, or pavers. Permeable pavement and rain gardens can be combined in parking areas to create what are called green parking, which is right over here. And you can also combine them along streets and sidewalks to create green streets. You can also include both smaller scale green infrastructure elements and larger scale green infrastructure solutions in the same site. For example, Liongate Park in Bloomfield, New Jersey used to be a thread and scientific glass factory. Until recently, it was a vacant brownfield in a residential area. The site has now been redeveloped with a resilience park. It has a soccer field, a recreation area, restored wetlands, and permeable parking. Beyond the recreational opportunities it provides for the community, it's also designed to store 10 million gallons of floodwater. While climate adaptation helps your community adjust to a changing climate, climate mitigation reduces how much and how quickly climate trends will change. The graphic shown here was developed by EPA's Repowering America's Land initiative. This initiative encourages renewable energy development on brownfields, Superfund sites, mines, landfills, and other current or formerly contaminated lands when such development would be aligned with the community's reuse vision. Siting renewable or clean energy on brownfields has a multitude of benefits. It reuses already developed land rather than undeveloped land. It provides a reuse opportunity for areas that might lack other options. It can also reuse sites in underserved areas and supports a clean energy economy. Not only can renewable energy reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which, as I just said, is climate mitigation, but it can also serve as a source of backup power during extreme weather events, which, if you remember, is climate adaptation. Most often, we find that wind and solar energy are being integrated into brownfield redevelopment sites. Wind energy comes in a variety of sizes. Solar energy can take the form of small-scale systems, like solar panels on a rooftop, to large-scale systems, like solar farms that cover many acres. Another less common source of renewable energy that can be integrated onto a brownfield site are geothermal systems. Geothermal systems capture heat from the earth to provide thermal energy for heating, cooling, and electricity. According to the Repowering America's Land Initiative Benefits Matrix, as of March 2023, there have been 26 brownfield sites in EPA Region 2 that have reported benefits associated with completed renewable energy projects on brownfield sites. Of these, 22 projects have been in New Jersey, and another 4 have been in New York State. All projects were solar panels, including rooftop solar panels on industrial and government facilities, as well as wholesale electricity, which comes from solar farms. There haven't been any reports of renewable energy projects on EPA Region 4 brownfields, but we hope to change that in the future. As part of Repowering America's Land, EPA has developed the Repowering Mapper. In August 2021, EPA pre-screened more than 190,000 contaminated lands, landfills, and mines for their renewable energy potential. Using the Repowering Mapper, you can search for your site and access a profile with screening results for solar, wind, biomass, and geothermal suitability. Energy-efficient technology can be integrated into new, renovated, and retrofitted buildings on site. In existing and new buildings, developers can replace and upgrade lighting and HVAC systems, install new energy-efficient appliances and windows, and incorporate building systems that automatically control heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and lighting. By incorporating energy-efficient technologies on site, building owners and tenants can benefit from lower energy costs. Reduced energy consumption also means reduced operating expenses, which can lead to quicker return on investment. In their most recent guidelines for brownfield assessment grants, seen here, EPA asked applicants to describe how the proposed project will improve local climate adaptation/mitigation capacity and resilience to protect residents and community investments, and, if applicable, describe how the reuse of the priority sites will facilitate renewable energy from wind, solar, or geothermal energy, or will incorporate energy efficiency measures. So how can we apply what we've discussed today to an EPA brownfield grant application? All right, here are some key takeaways that we can use. So we can use the FEMA Flood Map Service Center climate mapping for resilience and adaptation, and NOAA's sea level rise viewer, if it's applicable, to determine climate threats on your site. Then, we can explore green infrastructure and other climate adaptation solutions that would be applicable on your project scale to address the climate threats that you've already identified. Then, we can use the repowering mapper to see if your sites have been pre-screened for renewable energy potential. Using all of these tools, hopefully you'll be able to put together a successful application. Note that funding might be available through the EPA multipurpose and assessment grants if you want to pursue site-specific assessments of climate change impacts. Now I'm going to turn it over to William Kurzenberger to talk about how the City of Perth Amboy has built resilience into their brownfield redevelopment. William?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all to discuss brownfield remediation and climate change resiliency in the city of Perth Amboy, New Jersey. My name is William Kurzenberger. I am a redevelopment planner with the planning firm Topology. We're based out of Newark, New Jersey. And I've been working in the city of Perth Amboy in one capacity or another for about 10 years now. So go ahead, take me to the next slide. Thank you. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, Perth Amboy is a mid-sized city of about 55,000 residents or so, located across the water from Staten Island in the New York City metropolitan region of New Jersey. The city occupies a very special place, both socially and environmentally, with close access to major highways, single seat commuter train service to both the Jersey Shore and New York City. Next slide, please. Perth Amboy is a city with a long and proud history, but that history also comes with some unique challenges. The city's seal bears the words Portus Optimus, and indeed, the city has been an important waterfront hub of activity since its days as the capital of East Jersey before the American Revolution, and on through multiple waves of immigration and the Industrial Revolution, which really defined the city as it is today, in which Perth Amboy was a prominent location for manufacturing and distribution and has been for centuries. This legacy has left the city with several significant brownfields at our former industrial sites, particularly around our waterfront, many of which had sat vacant for generations, sapping the city of much needed revenue and valuable real estate. And additionally, having been an urbanized community for hundreds of years, it's resulted in an aging infrastructure and very high percentages of impervious surfaces, which combined with the city's combined sewer system and a highly clay-laden soil, it results in severe localized flooding and runoff pollution to the local waterways, such as the Raritan Bay, which form many of the city's boundaries. Next slide, please. Those challenges established, the city has enjoyed a lot of success in recent years with cleaning and returning our brownfields to productive uses. Over 300 acres of those brownfields are either now currently under remediation or have already been cleaned up and developed. And while the removal or the management of those contaminants in and of itself is an important goal for the protection of our population and the health of our regional environmental assets, the redevelopment of these sites has brought in numerous other benefits. It's helped stabilize the city's tax base through millions of dollars worth of tax ratables. It's brought in over 2,000 jobs, helped this economically disadvantaged community fund the creation of over 35 acres of new open spaces, safe pedestrian connectivity, which includes over 3 miles of waterfront promenade, of which we're quite proud, and other infrastructural improvements, including, as will be discussed here, as the emphasis of today's program, both solar power generation and stormwater management. So the city's leadership has long recognized the significance of climate change readiness and has benefited from partnerships with entities, particularly Rutgers University and other regional planning entities, to provide a lot of strategic guidance to reduce impervious coverage throughout the city and improve our resiliency to flooding events, both as a result of heavy rainfall and also coastal storm surges. So we have to worry about getting it on kind of both ends, and to ensure that all development is seized upon as a way to tackle all of these issues. Next slide. So I've been very blessed to witness the implementation of these planning efforts throughout my time here in the city. And I'm proud to say that now green infrastructure is a very common sight throughout the city, with several of our parks and public buildings now showcasing rain gardens, harvesting cisterns, as more as you can see on the right. The city directly engages its residents when we can in these efforts so that they can serve as both stormwater management, but also public educational tools to help folks become more familiar with these issues and become our advocates and allies in promoting these practices. And while storm system separation is required of redevelopers as part of our city's Focus 2020 redevelopment plan, green infrastructure has now become a near universal piece of the equation for our redevelopment projects as well. Next slide. In addition, while perhaps not as quite as urgent or ubiquitous as green infrastructure, um, the location of solar power generation is another undeniable success story of the city's redevelopment. We were the host of the first pilot program of the now permanently established New Jersey Community Solar Program in the state back in 2021. And this program in particular, I would say, has been instrumental in expanding the use of solar power in the city and elsewhere throughout the state. But many property owners, even before that program, were already enthusiastic about solar. And with the abundance of suitable rooftops present here, I can make a rough estimate. There's presently over 2,215,000 square feet of solar arrays at various scales in active use throughout the city, both for the personal use of the property owners and for the benefit of the greater grid. Next slide, please. So I've chosen two case studies, which include both robust solar and green infrastructure components to discuss here. The first project is known as the Elm Street Logistics Center, or the Steel Run Logistics Center. This project entailed the remediation of over 90 acres of former steel mill, Jerdau Ameristeel, and now operates as a distribution facility for Home Depot. The project stands out for a number of its community benefits, including 9 acres of public open space, inclusive of a waterfront amphitheater and new offices for the city's recreation department, which are located in a former office of the prior industrial user, among others. As you can see, as with many of the Prologis owned assets in the city, the roofs of this 100 million square foot facility feature solar arrays for both Home Depot and again, and the greater grid. Next slide. Pictured here is a very handy exhibit which depicts the green infrastructure present on the site, with a 5% of the total acreage of the site consisting of some sort of either bioretention system or of porous pavers. Next slide. The next project I wanted to highlight is the Eport project, also known as the Bridgeport project, located at a former Asarco refinery site. Just this property is just over 150 acres immediately to the north of the Outer Bridge crossing into Staten Island. Was home to some really nasty chemical contamination, mostly in the form of PCBs. It too is now a very successful warehousing and distribution center, hosting Target, among others. And this was the first phase of this project. It was the host of that first pilot New Jersey Community Solar Program installation that I referred to earlier in my presentation. It hasn't looked back since. Next slide, please. And here, while not as pretty as the other exhibit I showed for Elm Street, it's a depiction of the green infrastructure planned for the second phase of the site, the project rather, which is inclusive of both porous pavement outlined here in green and bioretention swales in blue. The second phase of this award-winning project is very near to completion as I speak and represents many other benefits to the city, including open space contributions, funding for fire safety vehicles, and something I'm particularly excited about, new sidewalks that will create new pedestrian access to parts of the city that were without them for generations. That's about, I think, 400,000 feet of those new sidewalks. Next slide. So I'll wrap up here with links here, which I believe have been shared or will be shared with you all. The first here is many of you may be asking, how if you're working with redevelopers or municipal entities, nonprofits, as to how to utilize some of these resources for promoting solar energy. I am not one to recreate the wheel. I think a very worthwhile environmental advocacy group, Sustainable Jersey, of which Perth Amboy was a certified participant. Put together, I think, a very much more useful guide than I can provide for you on community solar. And also, if anyone was curious on some of the studies that Rutgers University helped us with in terms of green infrastructure feasibility and that impervious coverage, but an impervious coverage assessment. And also there's a reduction guide, I think, included there within as well. Those resources I wanted to make sure were available to you all. But there's a whole heck of a lot else worth discussing in Perth Amboy, but yeah, it was great to be here to share these examples, and please don't hesitate. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of interest I neglected to mention, so please feel free ask as many questions as you wish.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, William.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Of course. 1 second here while I get my video back. Great. So before we go into questions, I'm just going to talk a little bit about NJIT TAB. So, as we alluded to before, NJIT TAB provides free technical assistance to state, regional, county, tribal, and local government entities and nonprofit organizations interested in learning about, identifying, assessing, cleaning up, and redeveloping brownfield sites in EPA Regions 2 and 4. At NJIT TAB, we provide technical assistance through our Brownfields Academy, Brownfield Community Engagement and Educational Forums, and one-on-one technical assistance. Our Brownfields Academy is available at njit.edu/tab. There you can find recordings of past webinars, how-to videos, news, upcoming events, as well as resources like funding sources and federal and state contacts. We also hold a variety of workshops, including grant writing workshops, full-day summits, and other community-specific events. Our free one-on-one technical assistance is tailored to your needs. For example, we can help you determine what climate adaptation and mitigation solutions might work best for your brownfield sites. TAB also provides free grant reviews to help you build stronger applications if you choose to pursue EPA Brownfield multipurpose or assessment funding. All right, well, let's get into the questions. Okay, our first one is from Jim Grant. I'll answer it live. If a former landfill is still a point source of water pollution, is capping useful? So I'll say that my training is in environmental planning. We do have a number of folks on our team, including our director of environmental services, who's on the line now, Kaylin Bruno. Kaylin, I won't put you on the spot, but we have Kaylin and additional folks who are remediation, brownfield revitalization and remediation specialists who would be able to answer that question for you. If you want to contact us, we'll have that information later and I can connect you to the right people. And then Elise wants to know, are there concerns with green infrastructure in parking lots due to runoff from the lots and cars? If so, are there methods to develop green infrastructure in parking lots while reducing contamination from runoff? Thank you, Elise. So in terms of green parking lots, actually what we're finding is not only is this a stormwater management solution for reducing water quantity, but it's also a means of improving stormwater quality. So the vegetation that you use in that can also, capture those contaminants from the runoff and filter them out. William, you can feel free to add anything onto that as well.
I would say you've got it pretty well covered. I mean, I would say one thing I would mention from learned experience with pervious pavement in particular is maintenance is very important. That you need to take great care to kind of vacuum out the pavement of dust, debris, what have you. Otherwise, it's going to operate very similarly to traditional pavement very quickly.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Jim wanted to know, William, what are potential health hazards building a warehouse over PCB contaminated land?
Well, in full disclosure, I can't represent myself as either a medical or environmental science expert. However, I can say that with the remediation of PCBs in particular, a lot of that is a risk-based removal strategy as opposed to simply containing the PCBs on that, and that was the case with the Sasarco site as well. Yeah, I mean, in addition to the human health exposure, you want to make sure it gets carefully contained for the protection of the local waterways there as well through the groundwater table. So you really, if possible, want to get that stuff offsite to a appropriate treatment and disposal facility.
Awesome. Thank you. And yes, again, I'll plug our Brownfields remediation specialists here at NJIT TAB, who can help you with more contamination-based questions. And then also from Jim, what are the grants available for green parking? I would say, again, the EPA has some activities that they will fund. They also have like a variety of information on green infrastructure on their website. Also, I would say FEMA also funds green infrastructure projects. So if you have like a natural hazard mitigation element to your project, you could potentially apply for FEMA funding as well. And again, William, I'll let you add to that if you so choose.
Oh, no, I think that it's comprehensive.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you all for contributing. My other folks, Fatima, Mimi, do we have anything in the chat that needs to be answered?
Yes, and thank you so much, William and Carrie, for that presentation. It was really fascinating. I never knew that the ways in which we could make our infrastructure more green. It was eye-opening for me, and I kind of now want to look at the buildings in my area and like, how are you built? Are we future-proofing ourselves for our changing climate? So thank you so much. We did get a comment from Ms. Kira Thompson. She said a point of interest for the panel. In addition to EPA's Brownfield program, New York implements its own Brownfield cleanup program, which is voluntary and not grant-based. It awards tax credits for qualifying expenses. New York is now requiring green and sustainable remediation best management practices to be included in all document submittals for all remedial programs and will likely become a remedy selection evaluation criteria in the near future. That's really great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Kira. All right, if we don't have any questions at the moment, I just wanted to share some information. Again, should anyone present today have any additional questions or comments, you could also feel free to utilize our post-webinar survey or connect with us on our NJIT TAB LinkedIn page. Again, you could also visit our website at www.njit.edu/tab or other social media platforms to access more information, resources, and news. Actually, speaking of news, we have a few upcoming webinars coming up that you may be interested in. We have them up here for you. For starters, on March 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern, join us for Brownfields, A Story to Tell. We actually have Elise here, if you don't mind, telling us a little bit about your webinar. Maybe we'll get some folks interested in attending that as well.
Sure. I think, okay, there we go. Hi, guys. My name is Elise Muller. I'm a Brownfield Redevelopment Specialist for NJIT TAB, and I'm going to be joined by Maria Kohler. She's an adjunct professor of civil and environmental engineering at NJIT and president and owner of Hydrotechnology Consultants, Inc. And on March 21st, we're going to discuss the significance of being able to tell the history of the impacts of contamination to our neighborhoods and the humanity and redevelopment potential. Why is this important to us? Because effectively telling the story of your project is critical to accessing resources such as funding and partnerships. So you should join this webinar if you want to learn techniques to reimagine the way that you describe your brownfield redevelopment project so that you can maximize the positive impact for communities, officials, and organizations. Hope to see you there.
Great, thank you so much. We also have an upcoming webinar March 28th at 11 a.m. Eastern, called Life After BOA. Carrie, I know you just spoke a lot, but if you don't mind sharing about that, feel free to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll be joined by Leslie Zlatev from the New York State Department of State, and we will be talking about the BOA program. So that's the Brownfield Opportunity Area in New York State. We'll talk about how after you get this designation, after you've done a lot of planning work, what are the next steps? How you can continue to work with your partners, how you can have your community champion really push your project forward, and what other pre-development activities are necessary to get developers on your site and to successfully revitalize your property. So looking forward to that.
Great, thanks for sharing that. And we look forward to having you join us for some of these webinars. For those that can't make it to our webinars, again, I know Carrie said it before, and I'll say it again. We do post our recordings along with presentations and related resources and links on our website at www.njit.edu/tab/webinars. We just posted actually our most recent webinars, Pop-Up Progress, Unveiling the Magic of Temporary Brownfield Makeovers, and Brownfield Contaminants and Human Health. Feel free to view those recordings after today's webinar or explore the site to find a vast library of resources, links, and other informative videos. Along with webinars, if you could go back one slide, I'm sorry about that. NJIT TAB also participates in many in-person events throughout the year. For example, Kaylin Bruno, our Director of Environmental Services for NJIT TAB, will be having 2 events in April in the Mohawk Valley area. Kaylin, would you like to speak on that?
Sure. Yeah, the Mohawk Valley Brownfield Developers Summit is happening April 23rd and 24th. It's a 2-day in-person event up in lovely Herkimer County in the Mohawk Valley. That is more for advanced practitioners of brownfield and developers. So if you want to take a deeper dive on issues related to financing, it's definitely the event for you. Leading up to that, though, we do have a webinar for Brownfield Basics. So if you're attending the summit and you just kind of want to brush up on your Brownfield Basics, or you want to get up to speed, please feel free to register for that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kaylin. Hopefully we can meet some of you all in person. If you're not local, we would love to come visit you in your communities, actually. We could provide a multitude of services, again, from one-on-one technical assistance to in-person events such as our Brownfield Basics workshops, our academies. I know Carrie went over that earlier, so I won't repeat it. But again, feel free to check out our website. I think I'm going to become like the unofficial NJIT TAB cheerleader. Please check it out. It's really great. And also feel free to also connect with us if you're interested in coming visiting your area. Feel free to reach out at our email tab@njit.edu. Our social media information here is up as well. I believe that is up. Great, thanks. Be sure to connect with us for news and to know when we'll be in your area in the future. And with that, if we have no more questions, I just want to make sure. I don't see any more questions. Okay, great. So we thank you for spending some time with us today. I hope you all have a great day and many successes wherever you are in your Brownfields journey. May you build more sustainable and resilient communities.